The terminal at Houston Liberty International pulsed with the usual chaos of a late Friday morning. Rolling luggage thumped against polished floors, flight announcements echoed overhead, and the scent of burnt coffee hung stubbornly in the air. Officer Caleb Thatcher stood near gate 34, with his usual quiet presence, one hand on his utility belt, the other resting lightly on the leash of his retired K-9 partner Bishop. The Belgian Malinois looked alert, ears perked, tail still, eyes scanning every movement like he could see something no one else could. Caleb trusted that nose more than most people he'd ever served with. "You see something?" Caleb muttered. Bishop gave a low huff in reply, his stance tense. Then suddenly, he barked, not once but a sharp, urgent burst of sound that cut through the terminal noise like a blade. Caleb followed Bishop's gaze. She stood near the security checkpoint, tall, mid-30s, blonde, maybe 7 or 8 months pregnant. She was dressed too carefully, tailored navy coat, clean white blouse, expensive flats. Her hair was pulled back into a tight bun, oversized sunglasses masking her expression. She looked calm, too calm. Bishop's barking escalated. "Not aggressive, warning, easy," Caleb said, pulling slightly on the leash. Bishop didn't budge. The woman, Mara Jensen, as her boarding pass would later reveal, kept walking, her hands full with 2 paper bags. She didn't flinch at the barking, didn't even glance at the dog. Her gait was steady, until it wasn't. She took 2 more steps and collapsed. The bags spilled open, papers, a small stuffed bear, an envelope, and a military dog tag clattered across the tile. Caleb was at her side, instantly dropping to one knee. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" No response. Her skin was pale, clammy. He reached for his radio. "Medical emergency." At gate 34, female, late-term pregnancy, consciousness lost. Bishop was circling her now, pacing nervously, his body low and ears flat. Not once did he stop watching her face. Not once did he leave her side. Caleb's eyes caught the envelope on the ground, slightly crumpled, with one word written in shaky cursive. "Sorry." Inside, just barely visible, was a folded letter and something that looked like his heart skipped. A military dog tag, worn, scuffed, faint lettering that still held its weight in steel. "Reeve Hollis J. Oppos." Caleb stared at it, stunned. Hollis Reeve had died 21 years ago in a firestorm of bullets and classified lies. Caleb had seen the body bag, attended the closed casket funeral, felt the crushing guilt of surviving that final mission, and now here it was, his tag in the hand of a stranger who had just collapsed at his feet. The paramedics arrived moments later. Caleb stepped back, watching them work quickly, efficiently. They lifted Mara onto a stretcher, still unconscious, vitals shallow. "What's her name?" one of the EMTs asked. Caleb didn't answer right away. He picked up the stuffed bear in the envelope, then glanced at her boarding pass sticking out from the mess. "Marla Jensen." He finally said. The EMTs nodded and wheeled her toward the emergency bay. Bishop trailed behind, eyes still locked on her. Caleb followed them halfway before stopping at a quiet corner in the terminal. He opened the envelope with a trembling hand. The paper inside was worn at the edges, the ink faded in places. "If you're reading this, it means I failed. I didn't protect her. Some ghosts don't haunt, they warn." The signature below was familiar. He'd seen it 100 times before, scratched on field reports, supply requests, and one drunken birthday card back in Kuwait. Hollis. Caleb's grip tightened. This woman, this letter, this tag, none of it made sense. Hollis had no family, no children, no one except the few brothers in arms who still remembered his name when the night got too quiet. So why did this woman carry the past like she'd lived it? Bishop let out a low whine and nudged Caleb's boot with his nose. Caleb looked down, then back toward the terminal doors where the gurney had disappeared. "This woman shouldn't know his name," Caleb whispered, "and yet she's carrying his past like it's her own." He slid the dog tag into his pocket, straightened his back, and followed the trail out the doors into the storm he didn't yet understand was coming. The clinic room at the Houston Liberty Airport Medical Unit smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee. Dim fluorescent lights buzzed above, casting a pale wash over the sterile walls. Caleb sat in a hard plastic chair, the envelope in his lap. His fingers traced the crease over and over again, as if the texture might change the meaning of the words inside. "If you're reading this, it means I failed to protect her. Some ghosts don't haunt, they warn Hollis." He read it for the 3rd time, then looked again at the dog tag on the table. The weight of it hadn't changed, but everything else had. Bishop sat silently beside him, staring at the closed door like a sentinel. Caleb leaned back in the chair, jaw clenched. Hollis Reeve had vanished off the grid 2 decades ago, officially Kia during a joint intel op overseas. But this was something else. A woman who knew his name, a note written in his hand, a stuffed bear clutched like a time capsule. And that look in Bishop's eyes, that sharp, alert stillness, told Caleb this wasn't just a coincidence. Something buried had clawed its way to the surface. A soft knock pulled him out of thought. A nurse peeked in. "She's awake, asking for you." He rose slowly, sliding the letter back into the envelope. Bishop was already on his feet. Inside the room, Mara Jensen looked like a ghost in cotton. Her hospital gown hung loose over her frame, her blonde hair must face drawn. Yet her eyes were sharp, watching him. "You're Officer Thatcher," she said quietly. Caleb paused. "Yeah, that's me." She nodded once more to herself, then to him. "My mother said you'd come." That caught him off guard. "Your mother?" "Her name was Isla. She died last year." Left a box with a note, said, "If anything ever happened I should find you, you'd know what to do." Caleb stared at her, his thoughts spinning. I haven't seen Isla in over 20 years. She was a translator in Kandahar, quiet, smart. And the only reason we made it out of a few tight spots, she met someone there, didn't she? Mara asked. A soldier named Hollis. Caleb's throat tightened. Yeah, Hollis Reeve. Mara sat up a little straighter. He was my father. The room fell silent. I don't have proof, she added. No DNA, just stories. And this, she pulled something from beneath the blanket, a folded letter sealed in wax. He wrote this before he died. My mother kept it hidden until the cancer got bad. She told me she was afraid that they'd come for me the way they came for him. Caleb took the letter slowly. The wax seal was cracked from age, the handwriting on the front unmistakably Hall. Why now, he asked. Because someone's been following me, Mara said. First in Dallas, then Austin. Same guy, black SUV, tinted windows, never close enough to catch, but always there. I came to Houston because it was busy. Anonymous. I didn't think anyone would notice me. She glanced down at Bishop, but he did. Bishop was watching her again, unmoving. There's more, she said. My mom once mentioned a name. Ryan said it was what they were running from. Caleb's face darkened. Ryan was supposed to be a myth, an off-book operation buried after 2011. I knew Hollis got pulled into something bad on his last deployment, something that made him cut ties. He stopped writing, stopped calling, then boom, Kia. Mara looked down, her fingers trembling. You don't believe I'm his daughter? I believe you're in danger, Caleb replied, and that's enough for now. He turned toward the window, heart pounding. He couldn't shake the sense that this wasn't just about one woman or one soldier's ghost. Something old was waking up, something designed to stay buried behind him. Mara said softly, they didn't come for me because I'm his daughter. They came because I might be the last thing he ever protected. Caleb said nothing, but the truth hit him like shrapnel, and Bishop, still silent, moved to sit at Mara's feet. The overnight storm had left the tarmac slick with rain as early flights taxied under blinking runway lights inside the airport clinic. Caleb Thatcher stirred his coffee, but didn't drink it. Something in his gut itched attention. He hadn't felt since Afghanistan. The way Mara spoke, the way Bishop had reacted, the letter, the dog tag, nothing about this was normal. Then the alarm went off. A nurse sprinted down the hallway. She's gone, her voice sharp. The pregnant woman, Jensen, she's not in her room. Caleb was already moving. He charged into the room. The bed was empty. The four-stand tipped over, but no signs of a struggle, just the quiet, clinical, cold security footage. He barked, already heading toward the monitoring room. The screens blinked as he scrubbed through the timeline. At 2:14 a.m., two paramedics in white coats wheeled a stretcher out of the clinic bay, heads down, calm, efficient. They even nodded at a passing janitor, but Marla was strapped down. No distress signals, no alarms. One tech said, bewildered, they used real credentials. Fake uniforms, real clearance. Caleb muttered, damn it. He turned to Bishop, find her. Bishop's ears perked. Caleb led him to the exit door. The imposters used. Bishop sniffed once, then bolted. They moved fast across the lower terminals, cutting through the loading dock, across the auxiliary lot. Bishop stopped suddenly near the edge of the cargo zone and barked low and urgent. Tire marks, oil, a van had been here recently. Caleb reached for his radio, then stopped. Ryan, if they were involved, protocol wouldn't help him now. It would get her killed. Instead, he pulled out an old burner phone, the one reserved for ghosts. One ring, then a voice. Didn't expect to hear from you, Thatcher. I need a trace. Quiet, something tagged Helix Project Archive. Anything static. Then you just opened a file. Someone buried with concrete and fire. I'll call back. Caleb slid into his truck. Bishop already beside him. Rain hit the windshield like static. In the rear view, Houston's skyline shimmered like something on the edge of memory. Somewhere in the city, a young woman was being taken against her will, and her past was starting to bleed through. Mara woke to motion. She was strapped down, a sharp chemical sting in the air. She blinked into darkness. The van bounced roughly on potholes in front. Two men spoke in hushed tones. She's farther along than we thought. Doesn't matter, they said. Bring her and they'll extract what they need. Did you see the necklace, the dog tag? Reeves. Marla's breath caught. She closed her eyes. Her mind was spinning, but something else deeper was stirring. Images. A hallway, white light, a woman's voice, echoes she didn't recognize, or maybe she did, her mother's lullaby, but inside it another layer, a tone, a pattern like code, syncing. A word echoed in her head. She bit her lip to keep from screaming. By dawn, Caleb had coordinates. The van had been picked up by a camera near a warehouse outside Houston. Industrial, disused, perfect for disappearances. When he arrived, Bishop growled low. Caleb approached carefully. Gun drawn. Inside was empty except for a single syringe on the floor and a piece of gauze with blood. He called, I'll be back. You got something? Helix wasn't just theoretical, Albie said. They tested on newborns, ones born under controlled circumstances, genetically selected parents. Your friend Hollis was listed as a carrier, male, subject number 5, the only successful pairing. Layla and him. Caleb went still, meaning Mara isn't just his daughter, she's a Helix subject, the only one known to survive. Albie paused. And if the code inside her activates, it doesn't just recall memory, it connects things, maps, data, name, skills. She's a weapon, Caleb asked quietly. Number worse. Albie whispered. She's a key. In the van, Mara's breathing slowed. She stared at the locked back doors. Her heartbeat matched the rhythm of the engine. Then the pattern shifted and something clicked in her head, not a memory, an instinct. She twisted her wrist, pushing against the leather strap. Her joints flexed unnaturally. Muscle memory. She never trained for taking over. 5 seconds later, she was free. The van jerked to a stop. The doors flung open, and she was already moving. She dove into the darkness of the street. A voice shouted a shot fired, then Bishop came crashing through the alley, furious and unstoppable. Caleb followed, slamming one of the men against the van. The other fled. Mara stood barefoot in the rain, blood on her knuckles, her eyes wide but calm, not in panic, in clarity. I didn't remember it, she whispered. I knew it like I've done it before. Caleb stared at her. You're sinking. She nodded slowly, and behind her Bishop sat down, staring not at Caleb but through him to her, to the one he'd somehow known to protect. The cabin in the Virginia woods was the kind of place forgotten by time. Dust clung to the windows and the wind whispered through the cracked shingles. Caleb and Mara had found it just before sunrise, guided only by a memory her mother had once scribbled in the margin of an old book. If the world ends, go where it began. Inside, the air was still. Mara sank into an old armchair, Bishop curling at her feet like he'd been there all along. Caleb moved methodically, checking windows, securing doors, the habits of a man who'd lived through too many ambushes. That night Mara didn't sleep. She dreamed, if they were dreams at all, of a place white and endless, where machines hummed softly and voices whispered without mouths. Children moved through corridors like ghosts, their eyes blank, their movements rehearsed. One of them turned to look at her. The face was her own. She woke with a start, drenched in sweat. Bishop was already awake, ears alert, staring at her like he recognized something she hadn't yet seen in herself. In the corner, Caleb sat with a file from Alb's encrypted drive, his face hard. You're remembering things you've never lived, he said quietly. That's not just memory, that's programming. Mara didn't respond. Instead, she crossed the room and picked up a folder labeled Helix. Inside were documents marked with military insignias, genetic charts, and 5 code names, 6A, 1 to 6-05. Each had notes beside it. All subjects terminated, except one, her name. The truth clicked into place with a kind of horrible logic. She hadn't just been protected, she had been hidden. That night, her senses sharpened further. She knew what Caleb was going to say before he spoke. She traced the pattern of the wind against the walls and whispered the next line of static from the broken radio before it crackled to life. Bishop wouldn't leave her side. His movements had shifted to less companion, more sentinel. When the coded message hit the laptop, a blinking window with the words Helix Protocol Phase 1 activated, they knew the storm was finally at their door. Caleb grabbed his rifle. They found us. Marlowe was already moving. They're not here for both of us. Just me. Outside, headlights cut through the trees, black SUVs. Too quiet to be government, too fast to be local. They moved quickly, slipping into the back exit and weaving through the trees behind the cabin. Mara took the lead without realizing she was doing it. Every step felt familiar, like she'd escaped this place before. They didn't just train me to survive, she said as they slid down a ravine. They trained me to lead. Gunfire ripped through the stillness. Caleb returned fire while Bishop circled to flank. Mara didn't run. She calculated, gauged angles, predicted moves before they happened. She was the mission now. They made it to an old service tunnel, a relic from when the cabin had been a Cold War fallback. It led them through the dark, wet silence until they emerged in a clearing 2 miles east. Their car was gone, but so was the team chasing them back. Inside, the laptop lay blinking, the words changed, Phase 2 pending sync. Mara stared at it, her heartbeat steady. They're not coming to find me, she said. Caleb raised an eyebrow. Then what? She looked up, her eyes no longer wide with fear but focused with certainty. I think they're waiting for me to find them. The storm had not yet arrived, but the air already felt heavy with the weight of something inevitable. In a cabin buried deep in the forested edge of Virginia, the world outside moved slower, as if holding its breath. Inside, the fire crackled low, casting flickers of light across the wood-paneled walls and the files scattered across the table. Caleb sat in silence, eyes scanning maps, logs, names, pieces of a puzzle no one had wanted solved. Mara stood by the window, her reflection barely visible in the glass, as the last snowflakes of late winter drifted down like ashes. She hadn't slept in nearly 2 days, yet her body moved like it belonged to someone who had trained their whole life for this moment. Maybe she had, maybe that was the point. There are 5 markers, she said softly, her finger tracing red dots on a blinking digital map. 5 Helix subjects. I'm one. Kane is another. Kane Ward, the boy they found just days ago in the snowy reaches of northern Pennsylvania, was now sleeping in the next room. His activation had mirrored Mara's nosebleeds, heightened senses, fractured memories of places he'd never seen, but more than that, it was the look in his eyes, the same quiet storm Mara now saw in herself. They linked us, Marla murmured, not just biologically, psychologically. We were designed to find each other. Bishop stirred from his spot near the hearth, ears twitching. The dog hadn't left Marla's side since the Helix file was decrypted. He moved like he was tuned to her breath. Caleb joined her by the window. What's the plan? She turned, her eyes clear. We find the rest before Ryan does. 3 SAR markers still blinked on the screen, one in Colorado, another near the Louisiana-Texas border, and the last drifting slowly through the outskirts of Seattle. They were moving, whether toward safety or into danger Mara didn't know. But she felt them now, not fully, not clearly, but like distant heartbeats in a room full of noise. They started with Colorado. Her name was Delaney Cho, 16, lived in a foster home on the edge of Colorado Springs, according to AllBC. Rain's decrypted Helix records. She had been labeled Subject 6A04, latent, untapped, controlled through medication, and monitored via academic testing. But when they arrived, the house was already burned to the ground. Local news called it a gas leak. Caleb called it a cover-up. She ran, Mara said, crouched by the ashes. Her hand brushed something half-buried, a school notebook, charred. But intact inside were sketches not of people or flowers, but of blueprints, memory fragments, symbols from the Helix. Documents. She's waking up, Marlo whispered. She left before they got here. They followed her trail for 112 miles, abandoned gas stations, stolen coats, a journal left behind in a bus terminal restroom with one scrolled sentence. I hear her voice in the dark. I think I'm becoming her. By the time they reached the second target, the tension in the team had shifted. Kane had stopped asking questions. Instead, he observed, calculated. Where once there was fear, now lived focus. The next subject, Nathan Reyes, 6A05. Wasn't a child. He was 21, working as a mechanic in a forgotten town along the Louisiana border, raised by an uncle who kept him off the grid. Mara found him sitting alone in a garage, staring at an engine he'd disassembled completely, though he claimed he didn't remember doing it. You ever take apart something without knowing how you learned? He asked her. She nodded. Every day since I woke up. When she told him the truth about Helix, about Hollis, about Ryan, he didn't blink, just stood up, grabbed a wrench, and said, then let's take them apart too. The last marker flickered for hours, as if trying to decide whether to be found. Seattle, a name, Ka-17, adopted online records erased 6 months ago. Mara didn't need files. She followed instinct, now sharpened into something almost unnatural. They found Ka hiding in a botanical garden, barefoot in the rain, talking to the plants like they were old friends. She turned when Mara approached. I've seen your face in my dreams, Kaya said calmly. I thought I was losing my mind. No, Mara replied, you're finding it. 6 hours later, they stood together, 5 Helix subjects in a circle of quiet inside a decommissioned silo deep in Montana, a temporary base courtesy of Cassandra's contacts. The cold air inside the concrete walls hummed with tension. They didn't speak like strangers, they spoke like mirrors. Kane, Delaney, Nathan, Kamara, each had woken differently. Each had gifts, instincts, insights, reflexes that seemed to complement the others. They weren't soldiers, they were patterns, and something in their blood had been designed to unlock only when the network came online. Ryan was coming, that much they all understood, but what they didn't expect, what none of them were prepared for, was how easily they synchronized. They didn't build us to survive alone, Mara said. They built us to awaken together. Down in the silo server room, Cassandra and Caleb planted the virus, an engineered wipe of every Helix dataset they could access, but the final core, the root of the Helix control protocols, was still stored underground, beneath a facility marked as decommissioned on every government map, its real name Echoite 0. They reached the Montana coordinates at dawn. Steel doors greeted them, guarded by silence and sand. No soldiers, no sentries, just dust and waiting inside. The facility still pulsed with residual power. Lights flickered, doors unlocked without codes. Bishop led the way, almost as if he knew the turns before they took them. At the heart of the compound, Dr. Julian Cross stood behind a reinforced glass wall. You were never supposed to meet, he said through the intercom. You were supposed to replace chaos with control, but now you've become the very thing we feared. No, Mara said. We became the thing you never understood. She placed her hand on the biometric pad, accepted her touch, the core system activated, and Mara issued a single command. Erase files, disappeared maps, collapsed control fragments, scattered. Echo protocol. The last failsafe disarmed. The system died. They emerged hours later into a sky burning with early sunlight. The wind was cold, but it didn't matter. Kane looked back at the collapsed entry. It's really over. Mara didn't answer. Immediately, she pulled the old dog tag from her pocket, the one her mother had kept, Hollis's name still carved into it, faint but unbroken. They built us to obey, she said softly, but we learned to choose. Bishop stood beside her, tail flicking once as the others gathered around together, not as subjects, not as weapons, but as survivors of a system that failed to control what it feared most. Free. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next